Justin Tinsley is a culture and sports writer for The Undefeated, a sports and pop culture website at ESPN. Justin grew up in Virginia and studied public relations at Hampton University, then marketing and communications at Georgetown University. Today, Justin is in Cambridge to speak to the Shorenstein Center Fellows at Harvard University about social activism through pop culture. Thanks for being here, Justin.
Thank you for having me.
So, Justin, first thing I want to talk about,
Right.
You were part of the Undefeated's team down in Atlanta for the Super Bowl.
Absolutely.
We're in Boston. Home of the New England Patriots, who happened to win that Super Bowl in Atlanta. Even though that the Super Bowl was a big deal and the halftime show was always a big deal, there was a lot of people who were saying that this halftime show shouldn't be paid attention to. Artists were essentially boycotting it because of the NFL and their relationship with Colin Kaepernick. One of the things I saw was a lot of people saying that maybe the biggest presence at the Super Bowl was Colin Kaepernick, even though he wasn't there at all. So was that what you saw? Was there that presence of Kaepernick there during Super Bowl week?
He was the biggest presence at Super Bowl week.
Yeah.
But you can make the argument that Colin Kaepernick is the biggest presence in the NFL, period.
Yeah.
Like, it's impossible to get away from him. His collusion case is coming up this year, and you could just run through the list of quarterbacks that have been signed since his last game. Well, I believe it was January 1st, 2017 when he threw his last pass. And I mean, I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell you what it feels like. And it does feel like that he has been pretty much exiled from football. And the reasons he has been exiled from football has only made the situation so much bigger, especially given the times that we're living in right now.
Again, leading up to that Super Bowl, last year we had Jay-Z and Beyonce on the album. Jay-Z saying, I said no to the Super Bowl. You need me. I don't need you. And a lot of people bringing a lot of flack to Travis Scott because he was agreeing to be in the Super Bowl halftime show, and a lot of people were saying you shouldn't do that. So how much of an impact was Kaepernick having on the game itself and what viewers saw during the halftime show?
A lot of people have said, they're boycotting football because Colin Kaepernick hasn't been signed. When in reality, at least to my knowledge, I don't think Colin Kaepernick has ever said stop watching football because he definitely still watches it. Eric Reed is playing for the Panthers now. Kenny Stills played for the Dolphins this past season. He's very close friends with them. But there is that sense of loyalty and allegiance to it because you kind of feel like this is just bigger than what the sport represents right now. And I think and just judging from my vantage point, I'm not in Travis Scott's camp by any stretch of the imagination. But I think what Travis Scott was, he said that, we spoke and we came to a mutual understanding, when in reality, I don't think it was that.
And you wrote about this, how this may affect Travis Scott's career. But overall, I mean, what we're talking about, sports and culture, as a reporter focusing on those two things, how much has your job changed because of the nature of how politics are today? And how much do you have to focus on the political and not just what's happening on the fields or in music?
To be quite honest with you, I've always told people I never wanted to just write about what was happening on the field or what happened in a recording booth. Because it's like this. You don't need me to tell you that LeBron James is good at basketball. I think everybody can kind of look at that, 16 years in, regardless of what's going on with the Lakers right now. I think you could tell, like, this guy's pretty decent at basketball. But if there's a correlation, if there's something about LeBron off the court that parlays to what he does on the court, that's where the story is for me. The story, the rock hitting the water is him dropping a 28-point triple-double. The real story is, his performance on the court and how that helps the school that he just opened in Ohio. Him helping Octavia Spencer get funding for a project when he shouldn't have to do that. Those are always the stories that I wanted to write about. And I've never been afraid to tackle the political aspect of it because at the end of the day, politics have always been tied to sports. Regardless of, the whole stick to sports phrase, that's like a bizarro fantasy world type phrase because it's never been like that. And I tell people all the time, if you think stick to sports was something that just came up right now, go back to newspaper archives and look up Muhammad Ali, what they were saying about him actually in 1967, in 1968. They were calling him anything but a child of God in those newspapers. So I've never been afraid to tackle sports and politics and culture because they're all in bed with each other anyway.
Or like John Collins, Tommy Smith in '68. All sort of the same
Kareem
thing.
refusing to go to the Olympics in 1968, but George Foreman waving the flag at the 1968 Olympics. Like those stories are fascinating to me, not necessarily what they do on the field or in the ring or on the court.
We had sort of a spike in activism of athletes in the '60s, and then sort of died down after that. But now we're seeing a lot more athletes lean into activism one way or the other. Why do you think that's happening now? And do you think that with companies like Nike getting into that act, how is that affecting what athletes are doing?
I think you're seeing them lean into it more because I think you can see history being made like in real time. And a lot of these things affect these athletes. Just because you get a $150 million contract doesn't mean you're immune to, being stopped by the police or being racially profiled. Like LeBron's one of the biggest athletes in the world, but he had a racial epitaph spray painted on his gate. It sounds weird to quote Kanye West at this point in time in 2019, but the artist formerly known as Kanye, he had a really good line on one of his earlier songs. Like, even if you're in a Benz, you're still in a coupe. That's what that means. Like, just because you have money doesn't make you immune to, these injustices. So I think a lot of athletes understand that, and I think a lot of athletes see the power in their voices, one side or the other.
Right. Well, what changed? Because this wasn't always like this. Until a few years ago. What
I think if I had to pinpoint one instance, and it could be a million. I'm not saying this is the one.
Yeah.
But at least for me, when I really started to notice a change was the George Zimmerman verdict in the Trayvon Martin case.
Yeah.
I think that was kind of like one of those watershed moments where a lot of people were like, all right. And I think that hits home for a lot of people. Same way with a lot of these athletes. Serena Williams. Mm-hmm. Serena Williams lost her older sister to gun violence.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these athletes are using personal experiences to project to the masses. And I think if I had to pick one instance, it was probably the Trayvon Martin verdict.
Yeah, and that's what we saw when LeBron was with the Heat, him wearing the hoodie with the rest of his teammates.
And the Trayvon Martin killing actually happened the night of the All-Star game in 2012 in Florida. So, and he was a big Heat fan. So that you can tie that back to sports. These guys are not just these guys and these women. They're not just playing for a bunch of blank faces in the stands. These people have stories as well.
Right.
So, and I think people remember that. And just to answer your question about Nike, I think it's a positive. I think it can be a positive thing. At the end of the day, they're a company. They want to make money.
Yeah, it's bottom line.
And at the end of the day, Kaepernick got bills to pay too.
Yeah.
But as long as you're not watering down what the message actually is, and I don't think his message has been watered down yet because he hasn't allowed anybody to dictate the course of what his message actually is. And that's probably a good thing because it doesn't speak a lot.
And with all this, what's the end game here? Where does all this activism actually lead to? What are the changes that these athletes actually want? Or at least what are you saying that this actually goes to?
We see the issues plaguing this country right now. We can run down a laundry list.
Yeah.
And as long as there are issues still there, there's still things to work towards. We see injustices anywhere, and it's not just race. Right. It's not just race, it's economics. We want economic prosperity, we want racial prosperity, we want financial prosperity, whatever the case may be. So I think equality, in this case, once you achieve one thing, there's two more that you got to keep fighting for. So I don't think there's ever going to be an end goal.
Yeah.
Because utopias aren't real, unfortunately. And I tell people all the time, they call Muhammad Ali the greatest of all time. I don't think that's just because what he did in the ring. What he did in the ring was incredible. But there's reasons why the Thriller in Manila. There's reasons why the 3 fights with Frazier were so big, because there was a story about him that was so much bigger than just putting on gloves and fighting for 12 or 15 rounds.
Right.
It was the issues that he spoke on, the causes that he backed. Right. And I think a lot of athletes see that.
Getting back to the Super Bowl, lately, the trip to the Super Bowl to the White House has been a rite of passage for champions for decades now. And now that's become a bit of a, will they, won't they sort of thing. And because the Eagles last year, they were going to send a small delegation, and that ended up not happening because President Trump, he said that there should have been a larger delegation sent. And a similar thing happens to the Golden State Warriors, who are also disinvited from the White House. How do you think that the current president's actions have affected what athletes are doing, and how do you think that will affect things going forward?
I don't think it's controversial to say that he's divisive. And when you're divisive, you divide a lot of people. And when you divide people, they may not want to come to where you are. And I don't think for as long as this current administration is in the White House, is in Washington, D.C., I don't think you're ever going to see a WNBA or an NBA team.
That's right, and he hasn't even invited any of them at all.
I just think that the tradition of visiting the White House is no longer, I think the tradition now is who the hell's going to go? And which is when before, not even just with Obama, but with Clinton, Bush before him, and presidents before, when it became a tradition, that was something that athletes look forward to, because how often do you get to go to the White House?
Justin, last thing.
Yeah.
What is a topic that you think isn't covered enough, whether that's sports or pop culture, both, and what are you trying to bring attention to that people aren't seeing enough of?
Whew, that is a really good question. What isn't being brought up enough? Just like, and there's so many, man.
Yeah.
I think gender pay is really huge. Like I just told you about Octavia Spencer having to have LeBron James and Maverick Carter speak up for her in a meeting, saying no, she deserves X amount of money. Like Octavia Spencer is like beyond accomplished. You know, she. So I think that's one. I think another topic that really, it deserves all the media attention that it deserves, but I don't think it gets a lot, is the Flint water crisis.
Yeah.
I believe that's huge, man, because I feel like if Flint was Fairfax County, Virginia, this wouldn't be an issue right now. You know, but Flint hasn't had clean water in almost 5 years now. This is an American city.
Right.
This is an American city where people are paying American dollars and American taxes, and they can't get clean. They still don't have clean water.
Yeah.
And what that does for the psyche of a community, the psyche of a country, really, you can't cover that enough. So there's so many things I think deserve to be covered more, but those two in particular.
Justin, I really thank you for taking your time, and just for all the work that you and Undefeated are doing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.